So listen, I get it. Like, Stetson's a great player. I've made the argument all year, by the way, that we need to stop viewing Stetson as just the game manager, walk-on quarterback that's not making mistakes for Georgia. He was a playmaker. He can make plays with his feet. Like, I like his game a lot. Having said that, when you include him as a Heisman finalist and it's just a 4-person list, it immediately opens the door to snubs. You see, let me put it a different way. If the Heisman finalist list was just C.J. Stroud, Caleb Williams, and Max Duggan, I don't think there would be a lot of chatter online about who got snubbed or who's not going to New York. Because remember, going to New York is a big deal. Being a Heisman finalist is a big deal, both for the individual and for the program. More on that in a little bit. So as soon as Bennett's one of the 4, then all of a sudden you're like, hold on. What about Hendon Hooker? In his own conference, Hendon Hooker was voted first team All-SEC. Hendon Hooker was the Offensive Player of the Year in the SEC. So, like, wait, that doesn't make sense. They play the same position. And then you could also say, like, Blake Corum. Blake Corum didn't even play in 2.5 games. He had 1,400 yards. This guy was a one-man wrecking crew for a large part of the season on a team that also went undefeated. So if we're just taking like, hey, let's take the best offensive player from the team that just went undefeated, why isn't Blake Corum there either? So, and again, this is not like the Heisman Trust's fault. This is a voter issue, and I'll get to that in a moment as well. But I think what we need to start to realize is that you can love Stetson Bennett as a player and think that there's some guys that got snubbed. I think those two things can live equally together. I want to be very clear about that because I don't think Stetson Bennett is bad. I would, if I had to bet my own money, I would bet that Georgia wins a national championship again in this playoff. Part of the reason is because of Stetson Bennett. So I can think that and also think, hold on a second, there were other guys that deserved to be in New York more so than Bennett this year. Okay, those two things can be true at the same time because the season that Bennett had was actually an outlier when it comes to Heisman. Okay, and let me roll through it. So I'm not just going to sit here and chatter on. I want to tell you guys specifically why it was an outlier and why some of these other guys got snubbed. So Bennett had 20 touchdown passes. That's 42nd in college football. Okay, that's fine. There have been other Heisman winners, by the way, that weren't even in the top 10 in touchdown passes. Like, for instance, Johnny Manziel was 20th in college football in touchdown passes. He threw 26 touchdown passes. Now, that's 6 more than Bennett did. Manziel also ran for 21. Okay, that 21 was good for 7th in all of college football. So, like, there was another element to this. And Bennett, he's got, 7 total touchdowns? So, again, there's a bit of an outlier. The last Heisman finalist with 20 passing touchdowns and under 10 rushing touchdowns was turn of the century. Josh Heupel, Hendon Hooker's coach. Since 2010, Cam Newton. This is a better indicator. Since Cam Newton, if you just took at the average Heisman finalist that played the position that we're talking about, quarterback here, and there's been a lot of them, then what you would see is that the average season for that quarterback, a Heisman finalist quarterback, is 34 touchdown passes and 42 total touchdowns. And by the way, that's going into the Heisman ceremony. So that's not even including some of their playoff touchdowns. Right? Remember, Burrow went off and ended up having 60 touchdowns. So we're not even dragging that number up. That's based on where they were at going into the ceremony. And right now, Stetson Bennett has 20 and 27 total touchdowns. That's, again, this is an outlier. This is why there's an open door where you can start talking about snubs. And this is why the people that start talking about snubs actually have an argument. Because you look at Bennett, he's 15th in the nation in completion percentage. That's his best stat. Best stat. 42nd in passing touchdowns, 27th in yards per game. So you can say that he had a great year. You can say that he's a really good player. You can say that all of those things. And then you can say, hold on a second, what happened to, like, let's say the following individuals? Hendon Hooker, let's just look at him. He was voted first-team All-SEC. He had 27 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. And by the way, 2 fewer games than Stetson Bennett. He only missed one with injury, and that was Vandy, by the way. So where would it have been as far as touchdown totals for Hendon Hooker if he would have gotten to play against Vandy? Absolutely turned around a Tennessee program. Remember, that Tennessee program was in the dumpster. And Heupel gets there, and Hendon Hooker gets there, and all of a sudden, they're really 60 minutes away from being a playoff team. You know, the inexplicable loss to South Carolina, a game in which that's when Hendon Hooker went down. And by the way, I don't think that an injury should knock you out of the Heisman Trophy ceremony or voting block, in particular when it happens late. Like, he had the numbers necessary to go to New York, and he's not going to be there. Blake Corum. That's the other guy that I think a lot of people are upset about. Again, I talked about this already. He was the best offensive player on the other undefeated team. So if that's what we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about like heart and determination and all these things, well, guess what? Blake Corum's in the exact same mold as Stetson Bennett. So now you've got an argument if you're yelling about Blake Corum. And he's probably got better numbers when you look at it. Blake Corum had over 1,450 yards, which is 8th in the country. He missed, by the way. That's despite missing 2.5 games. And like I said, he was the catalyst to that offense for a huge portion of this season on an undefeated team. A team that, by the way, has rebuilt itself over the last 18 months into the second best team in the country by record. Michigan, second best team in the country over the last 18 months. There's a couple of other guys that I would just throw out there. As soon as Bennett's involved, then people in Texas can say like, hey, hold on. Bijan Robinson had the numbers to go there, didn't he? And I would say, yeah, he absolutely did. Bijan leads the nation in yards from scrimmage, just under 1,900 yards for scrimmage. That's he's got his second in total touchdowns with 20, and he carried the Longhorns down the stretch, obviously, multiple times with 200-yard games. And in fact, you could make an argument they lost their most important game to TCU, which would have put them eventually into the Big 12 title because they didn't give the ball to Bijan Robinson. He only had 12 touches in that game. How about this one, by the way? And this is a guy that nobody talked about at all. And you know what? I kind of blame myself. I should have brought him up a lot earlier. Michael Penix, the quarterback at Washington. Washington had a great year. Why? Their quarterback was sensational. Michael Penix led the country in passing, 363 yards per game. A team that went 10-2. They finished 12th in the country after not receiving a vote in the preseason poll. So, am I upset that Stetson Bennett is a finalist? No, I'm not. But when he's included, all of a sudden, all these other guys have an argument. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy that clip, make sure you click subscribe somewhere down here. From game highlights to exclusive interviews and rankings, we've got everything you need as a college football fan right here, College Football on Fox.